Hi, ladies and gentlemen of YouTube. And for a while now, on my Facebook page, I've been promising doing a ranking the albums of guess who? Little Feat. And I'm just going to start out by saying that this ranking was a little more difficult than I originally thought when I went and re-listened to these albums here just recently. And it was really difficult in a few different ways. We're just going to really address the studio albums from the glory days of the band from 1971 to 1979. I'm going to show you a few other things, but they're not going to be actually in the rankings. So we're going to start from least to first. I have to say I really enjoy all these albums. So even if I'm putting something at the end of the spectrum that's not as favorable, it's something that I do like very much. And that's what made this very difficult, especially. So coming in at number 7, this is the 1971 debut. And there's the compact disc. Self-titled album, Little Feat. You had Lowell George and Roy Estrada, both members of Frank Zappa's Mothers of Invention, who formed Little Feat, along with, of course, Bill Payne on keyboards, Richie Hayward on drums. Ry Cooder also guests on this, as does somebody named Sneaky Pete on pedal steel, and Russ Titleman with some piano, background vocals, and percussion. And there we have a photo there, if you can see the original lineup of the band. Not exactly the classic lineup of the band just yet. Still kind of a work in progress. And I must say that every time I listen to this album, I appreciate it a whole lot more, and I'd like to rank it a bit higher than number 7. However, there are some things that make it kind of like the outsider album of this whole bunch. You don't have the permanent or the classic, I would say, lineup in place here just yet. In terms of style, it's a little more bluesy, some blues and country more so on this album. So the direction isn't quite sorted out just yet. Though it's recorded quite well. There's some really well-produced tracks with like some orchestration and things like that. And then some that almost seem like a demo. So it's kind of a very uneven kind of record. This includes the original version of Willin', which would be redone on the second album. We'll get into that a bit down the road. And of course, on this version, Lowell George had injured his hand and could not play guitar on this. So Ry Cooder stepped in and did that. Very different kind of version, a little faster than the one we are more familiar with on Sailing Shoes. But anyhow, still a very interesting album. Also, I want to mention, as far as artwork, this is the only album of this group to not feature a painting by the artist Neon Park, who would become as much of their brand as the music, would give their albums a very distinct kind of look. And of course, one pre-Little Feat album that the Neon Park was probably the most well-known for was with Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. This is Weasel's Rip My Flesh. I believe this was from 1970. And so this just predates the first Little Feat album. Of course, Lowell George and Roy Estrada, both in the band on this record. It's my understanding Lowell George was only in the band for about 6 months. I don't know how long Roy Estrada's tenure was. But the album here, it says Lowell George, rhythm, guitar, and vocal on Did You Get Any On Ya? And of course, we have Roy Estrada is bass and vocal on Gas Mask. So I'm assuming that they played throughout the album, but those are just their two vocal tracks. So anyhow, they would go on, and Frank would help them, of course, get a deal with Warner Brothers to get them started. And so the next record I'm going to feature was actually the last album of the group, the original 70's group, and it kind of was the last recordings they did with Lowell George before, of course, he passed away in 1979. While he was promoting his only solo album, Thanks I'll Eat It Here, he was on tour and was found deceased in his hotel room. But anyhow, coming in at number 6 is going to be Down on the Farm. And there we have the compact disc version as well. Of course, a gorgeous piece of artwork by Neon Park. This one is actually one of my favorite of his Little Feat album covers. And while this isn't necessarily top shelf Little Feat from their classic period, I would say that sound is more with their classic sound, which of course featured, blues, jazz, New Orleans style funk, country, you name it. They were a stew of everything. Some people have called them Southern rock. I disagree with that because they are not a Southern band. They are a band from Los Angeles, of course, with roots with Frank Zappa. And so my number 6 album here is going to be Down on the Farm, released in 1979, would be the last album until 1988. They would disband for quite some time after the passing of Lowell George. Okay, so coming in at number 5, we have Time Loves a Hero from 1977. There's a lot of classic stuff on this. The title cut, of course, Rocket in My Pocket, Old Folks Boogie, classic live staples for this band. One track that is kind of controversial would be the instrumental Day at the Dog Races, which is the 4th track on the album. And that is a track which Lowell George does not play on. Apparently, Paul Barrere, who was the other guitarist in the band, and keyboardist Bill Payne were very much into jazz rock fusion, which was all the rage at that time. Bands like Weather Report and Return to Forever was where they were drawing some influences from. And it came out in this song, which Lowell George didn't see any place for him on that song. They did perform it live, but he would leave the stage. And the guitarist, I'm not sure of the guitarist's name, who currently takes his spot in the band. In tradition, keeping with that as well, he does leave the stage when they play Day at the Dog Races. I did see them 2 summers ago in Virginia, and they did perform that song. Okay, so that brings us up to number 4. And here we have from 1975, the Last Record album. Maybe not as many well-known songs on this one. There is a Political Blues, which they played quite a bit. And of course, there's the kind of novelty. Okay, that's all right. Scratch that. Okay, that wasn't on the original album. I'll explain to you something about my CD copy. Okay, on the CD, the original CD release of Waiting for Columbus, possibly one of the greatest, I won't say possibly, it is one of the greatest live recordings of the 1970s. Was even recorded in the DC area, I believe, at the Warner Theater. But anyhow, they left 2 songs off this when they did it on compact disc, since this was a double album. And one of those, well, they're both included on this: Don't Bogart That Joint and A Political Blues. They just tacked them on to the last record album. But anyway, it's still a fine album, although there's not quite as many recognizable things on this. It does hang together quite well. So I have that as number 4. Once again has the classic Little Feat sound. And that's going to bring us to number 3, which is 1973's Dixie Chicken, which is the 3rd album by the band. And once again, this is also one of my favorite Neon Park album covers. But yeah, the title cut, maybe the band's most famous song. Great stuff on here. 2 Trains, Roll 'Em Easy, Fat Man in the Bathtub, another very well-known Little Feat album. I believe this was the first one that actually charted, but it was in like the low 200s, like at 203 or 205. I did have all the U.S. chart positions of these written down, but unfortunately one of my cats decided to throw up on that, so I no longer have that post-it note, but I kind of remember the gist of how these guys charted. Just to backtrack a little bit, the debut album, which we ranked at number 7, did not chart whatsoever. And Down on the Farm was like in the mid-30s somewhere, excuse me, as are most of these records. The band wasn't huge nationally. They, in some regions, more popular than others. This part of the country, the Baltimore, Washington area, was kind of like their second home. They played here quite a bit. Even stayed and recorded in the Towson area at one point too. So yeah, they've got a lot of connections to this area of the country where they were a little more popular than a lot of other places. Okay, let's go to number 2, which is the band's 2nd album, Sailing Shoes. I don't believe if this charted, it was also like a 203 or something like that. It barely made a blip on the radar as far as the U.S. charts. But this is a fine album. We still don't have the second guitar of Paul Barrere on this record. It is dominated by, of course, Lowell George, master slide guitar player. But great songs on this. Easy to Slip starts it off. Really was considered as a single. They should have done it. Might have been a good radio song. You got Cold, 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 Tripe Face Boogie, big tune by the band. The good version of Willin', which Lowell George actually does play on after his hand is healed. The first album didn't get much attention, so they just went ahead and redid that tune, a much superior version. The one on the debut sounds pretty much like a demo in comparison to this. And you also have Teenage Nervous Breakdown. Of course, the title track, Sailing Shoes, is well known as well. You've got A Political Blues, another concert staple. We talked about that a little bit earlier, about the live version being tacked on to the last record album, I believe. Okay, and so that brings us to the number 1. And I kind of knew from the get-go this was going to be my number 1. I think it's their most classic album. Once again, here we have 2 copies. We have the CD and the vinyl here of Feats Don't Fail Me Now. Classic songs: Rock and Roll Doctor, Oh Atlanta, Skin It Back, which is The title comes from what a groupie supposedly said to Paul Barrere about his uncircumcised penis. She told him to skin it back. Feet Don't Fail Me Now, the classic title track of this. There's a medley of Cold, Cold, Cold and Tripe Face Boogie. Of course, those songs are from Sailin' Shoes. Again, as that album kind of got ignored, they wanted to redo some of these songs. They come up with other versions through playing them live, and so they've got a nice medley of those two tunes that ends this album. That clocks in at 10 minutes actually. But yeah, 1974, Feet Don't Fail Me Now. This is my #1 album from Little Feat. Now, as I mentioned, I wasn't really going to rank the later albums. I don't have physical copies of them all. I'll mention them just briefly here. Of course, this is 1988. I don't have the artwork for this. And this is Let It Roll. It is, these two albums I'm going to show you right now, they would have been at the end of the line if I was going to include them in the rankings. And this would have been next to last. This actually got nominated for a Grammy, but they lost out to U2. Very much the classic Little Feat sound. In terms of tunes, not quite as memorable, but the sound is definitely there. You can say, yeah, that's Little Feat, and you can hang your hat on that. And then I also have, I believe this is from, it's hard to see here. This is like 90 or 91, Representing the Mambo. I can't get into this album at all. And I don't really think I've listened to the whole thing. I haven't really had it all that long, but it's got kind of this late 80s digital hangover kind of production that ruins the vibe of the album. Very much a digitally processed type of guitar sound. I just find the production very, very difficult to get into. I kind of do like the cover, especially this guy with his maracas here. It's pretty nice. But anyhow, that's Representing the Mambo. And of course, I touched on Waiting for Columbus. This was 1977. Recently, this was released as a box set where you get all, I believe, 4 shows that this was culled from back in the day. And one of those is in Washington, D.C., so in this part of the country. But anyhow, yeah, that is the 1970s and a little bit beyond catalog of Little Feat. They did release a few more studio records in the 90s, probably a little hard to find these days, not that well received. The band pretty much playing all of this material from the classic era in concert. These days, when I did see them in Virginia 2 summers ago, they did play the Waiting for Columbus live album in its entirety. And I will most likely be seeing them in June at Pier 6. And it's my understanding that this time the featured album is going to be Feet Don't Fail Me Now, of course, which I've ranked as #1. So that should be a great show as well. So anyhow, we're going to have more ranking the albums coming up in the near future. I haven't decided what's next. There's a few I'm kicking around, but either way. So that's all for this one for right now. The ranking the albums of Little Feat. So I will see y'all later.